You know, Las Vegas never needs a reason to party, but how about your first win of the season, and it comes against the team that you once failed with? Josh McDaniels in the win column for the first time as a head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. 32-23 is your final, and that only tells part of the story here, as Denver does have their most potent offensive output of the season, but it comes now in one of their two losses, outgained in almost every category. 12 first downs to the 25 of the Raiders. They were just 3 of 11 on third down. Clean 50% for the Raiders at 7 of 14. Total plays tells you a big story here. The Raiders 74, the Broncos just 48 offensive plays, outgained to the tune of 299 to 385. Bryant, McFadden, Ryan Wilson in to talk this one between the Raiders and the Broncos. Big-time divisional moment, and Josh McDaniels finally gets that chip off his shoulder, gets the thing off his back, whatever you want to call it here, Ryan Wilson. How big was this moment to take on the team that once fired you, winless here with your new team, and finally get in the win column?
Yeah, over a decade since he was in Denver, of course, and he feels like a different coach, Josh McDaniels does. And I'm sure there was some panic, at least internally, about that 0-3 start. But you just went through some of the numbers there, Joe. And the other one that sticks out to me is time of possession. Vegas, 34 minutes to 25 minutes for Denver. And if you didn't know anything, you're watching this game, you would have been convinced that the Broncos were the 0-3 team. Somehow they had 2 wins coming into this game. They do not look like a 2-win football team. And I think what we saw is that Derek Carr was able to get Davante Adams more involved. The defense was able to make plays. They forced some big turnovers, including that fumble 6, if you will, from Amik Robinson when Melvin Gordon fumbled the ball, his 4th of the year. There's a reason he didn't play much after that as well. And I think the other takeaway is the Broncos continue to make mistakes in addition to the fumbles that put them in position to lose football games. They had 7 more penalties in this game. They now have 37 on the year. They're one of the most penalized teams in the NFL. A year after under Vic Fangio, they were one of the least penalized teams. So has Nathaniel Hackett made progress since week 1? Yeah, but that's a pretty low bar. On the other side, I think that Josh McDaniels has to feel pretty good about this win. Now, there's still a lot of work to do to get back in the playoff conversation, but 1-3 is a lot better than 0-4.
Big win here on the Vegas side of the conversation. Meanwhile, on the Broncos side, B-Mac, I think week 4 might be a little early to have any sort of manifestos or any sort of massive statements about any of these franchises, but they are starting to come into focus. So I will ask you, did we overestimate who Russell Wilson is at this juncture of his career?
I think so. And I think we overestimated what we would see from him based on where he was going, right? You got Sutton, you got Judy, you got Williams, you got Gordon. At that time, you had Tim Patrick. So you look at the arsenal that was surrounding him. Many people thought this would be a great relationship between quarterback and skill position players that would be able to flourish throughout the year. But there has been a disconnect, to say the least. I don't know if it's mostly on Russell or is it on the coaching staff offensively, but we saw okay numbers. It looked a little more entertaining because they were playing catch up, but we're not seeing the Russell Wilson that we thought we would see. You know, I'm used to saying curly hair Russell Wilson, and that's usually because he's doing something good. He's doing something great. He's doing something GOAT-like. I haven't been able to say that because the curls are not as curly as they once were when he was in Seattle. So they had to find a way to get this thing going because it won't get any easier. And this was a huge win for I almost said Oakland. I'm sorry, Vegas, for the Raiders, because they needed to get in the win column. But for Denver right now being 2-2, they might be one of the more uglier 2-2 teams in the National Football League right now.
Yeah, both teams were struggling coming into this matchup, guys, and it's the Broncos' struggles that really proved to be true in this matchup within the division that has plenty of figuring out to go down between now and the end of the regular season. But you mentioned it a little bit before there. Derek Carr and the connection with Davante Adams, his big offseason ad really hasn't borne the fruit that we expected it to see. We did see glimpses of that here on Sunday. What stood out to you in the way they were able to get on the same page here in this one, B-Mac?
Well, he kept going to Davante. That's the thing. Remember, in past weeks, he just wasn't looking his way. He was going the opposite direction. It seems to be on purpose. Like directly, he was trying to get other people involved. No, you brought this man in to get him involved. Give him double-digit targets week in and week out. And I can say this, though. Pat Surtain Jr. made things difficult for Davante. I know he ended up having over 100 yards, but Pat Surtain was in his bag today. That was a top-level matchup between Davante Adams and Pat Surtain Jr., but I like that Derek Carr continued to force the issue. Some wide receivers, you have to force them the football because they're that type of player, and I like seeing that today. Don't defer to others. No, Davante has to be your first read, and if he's covered, you still sometimes need to go give him a shot because he can come up with a huge completion.
I think that's it, B-Mac. That and Josh Jacobs went off in the run game, which obviously helped open things up in the passing game. But it felt like Derek Carr was trying to be egalitarian to make sure everyone gets involved. That's not why you bring in Davante Adams. To your point, you throw him the ball when he's single covered every single time. You throw him the ball half the time when he's double covered. And you're right, Patrick Surtain balled out. And Patrick Surtain is probably frustrated that the rest of his team didn't step up while he put up that type of performance against one of the best players in the NFL. But it is what it is. And for the Raiders, it's a win. And I think Josh McDaniels, who's never looked panicked over these first 4 games. And early in his career with the Broncos, we saw a different version of him. And I think that played itself out with a veteran quarterback, a veteran wide receiver, Davante Adams, and a defense that stepped up. And then added bonus, Josh Jacobs was able to do what he did in the run game. But I think B-Mac's exactly right. You keep going to Davante Adams until you get taught a lesson. By that I mean an interception. Until then, you keep going to him because he's going to keep making plays. We saw it for the entirety of his career in Green Bay, and we saw glimpses of it for the first time, it felt like, on Sunday in this win against the Broncos.
Defensive side of the ball, the Raiders finally putting together a little bit of a pass rush as well. 2 sacks on the season, both belong to Max Crosby coming into this game. They get 3 in this ball game. Now 2 did belong to Max Crosby. So that's 4 for Crosby and 5 for the team for those keeping track at home. Let's take a look at some fantasy numbers, some guys who got you some points. And I'm sorry you cannot start Max Crosby, those sacks, in a way. If you have the defense, I know. But here's a look at the offensive performers. Derek Carr, just 11 fantasy points, $188, nothing to show on the score sheet. Did a rush for 40 yards and looked pretty good going downhill. Russell Wilson, finally a multi-touchdown game, his first of the season, but it does not equal a win. It does give you 30 fantasy points. Josh Jacobs, as our esteemed colleague Ryan Wilson pointed out, ran buckshot. $144, 5 receptions, 31 through the air as well. 2 total touchdowns for 34 points for the former Bama back.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.